and wrestlers alike in the skills of Greco-Roman wrestling. The tapes are also meant to be used with the printed USA Wrestling syllabus. I wish you the best as you pursue excellence in the great sport of Greco-Roman wrestling. The first section of this tape series will deal with basic skills. These are not the 7 basic skills that we're all familiar with, but rather these are basic skills that apply directly to Greco-Roman wrestling. Also included in this section will be some of the basic body attacks in Greco, as well as some of the basic finishes. We're going to take a look at position on the feet for Greco-Roman wrestling, also referred to as stance. First thing we want to do is we want to establish a good foot base, about shoulder width apart, maybe a little bit more. The weight should be distributed slightly on the balls of the feet, so the knees are going to come forward just a bit, makes the heels a little bit light. Then the other thing we want to keep in mind is we want to keep the head up, the back straight, and the chest up. Now from here, elbows at the side, hands slightly forward, not extended. Then the last thing to complete the stance is this, the most important. You want to drop your hips to settle in here with a good solid low center of gravity. From a side angle it looks like this. If we contrast that with the freestyle stance would look more like this. The upper body torso area is bent over, whereas in Greco the chest, back, and head are straight up. Let's take a look at that together, contrasted with the freestyle stance. First we have on the left a freestyle stance, square stance, and on the right a Greco stance. And then we'll look at a staggered stance. Notice the torso position of both wrestlers. And then from another angle we have a square stance and a staggered stance.
Let's look at position or stance in this example with Olympic and world champions Oleg Kucherenko of the unified team and Vincenzo Maenza of Italy in the blue. Notice how the stance shifts from square to staggered to square. Here's another example with Olympic medalists Denis Kozlowski of the USA and Hector Milan of Cuba.
The next skill we're going to look at is motion. We start with our good stance. Now as we move, there's several ways we can move. We can move forward, we can move backwards, we can move laterally, we can circle this way, circle back and away. One of the important things to remember as you move is that you should always maintain a good wide shoulder width foot base. You want to avoid motions that bring you here. That's just basic common sense wrestling. The second thing is it's very important to work with your legs when you do your motion. The legs can't be lazy. You can't straighten up. this type of thing. Stay in a good stance, work with your legs, shuffle, move, back and forth. Another very important principle that you want to keep in mind, this is the same in freestyle, Greco, college style, the principle of shoulder, knee, toe. If you're coaching and you're looking at a wrestler and he violates that position here, he's out of position, he's off balance, you want to make sure shoulder, knee, toe is in line. If this is staggered, you've got shoulder, knee, toe here. There's always a solid base, good low center of gravity that the wrestler can come in and out of. Let's take a look at 3 different drills that you can use with your athletes to develop good motion and good movement. The first drill we're going to take a look at is a motion drill without a partner. The wrestler's going to get in a good position. He's going to start to move his legs. Again, very important to move the legs. Coaches, as your wrestlers are doing this, make sure they don't violate the shoulders, knee, toe principle. This is a very good drill because it develops endurance down in that low position. Young wrestlers want to come up and straighten out their legs, but this is a good way to, for endurance to be developed. Then as they do that later on, you can add their own attacks, arm drags, duck unders, make it almost like shadow wrestling out of their good position and movement. All right, the next drill we're going to take a look at then is a partner drill. Both wrestlers are going to start with their hands behind their back. They're going to drop their hips and get in a good position, make contact. And they're just going to start to push and move and try to maintain contact the whole time they do this. Again, for this drill, very important, the shoulder, knee, toe principle. And we'll take a look at an example of the wrestlers getting out of position. They tend to lean. There's a tendency to lean on the other person's body weight. That's a bad position. Correct that. Make sure the wrestlers bring their hips in and move and work with those legs to maintain good position. Now, the third drill we're going to take a look at is another partner drill. This time, one of the wrestlers is going to have his hands behind his back. He's going to get in a good position. The other wrestler will make contact. And he's going to try to take his partner out of position by pushing and pulling. The object now for the driller with his hands behind the back is to keep those hips coming up. Again, it forces the wrestler to work with his legs and maintain good position. Now let's see an example of poor position. The wrestler gets his head snapped down, taken to the mat. So the offensive driller should be trying to work for a snap down or trying to work for some kind of a move that takes his partner off his feet and out of his position.
As we watch 1993 world champion Raul Martinez of Cuba in the blue against his Romanian opponent, we see examples of all of these types of motion.
The next skill is contact. When we look at contact, Greco-Roman wrestling is very much a contact sport. The officials will constantly encourage contact. Separation is interpreted as being passive. Compared to freestyle, where wrestlers more often than not tend to wrestle from more of an open style and can get away with a little more of that than in Greco. So a couple key things in contact. First of all, when you make contact, you want to avoid reaching. You should rather bring your body to your opponent's body, hands out and alert, and then make contact with your hands here. Also, some wrestlers prefer to do this even before they make contact with the hands. They'll bring the shoulder in, make contact here, then contact with the hands. But the idea is the same as you bring your body to your opponent's body. Avoid reaching and extending yourself. Another common mistake when wrestlers make contact is this. They'll make contact. Once they make contact, they'll let themselves get out of position, and they'll use their opponent's body as a post, and they'll get themselves extended in their contact. You must maintain good position also in a close, tight position.
Here are several examples of contact from the 1992 Olympics in Barcelona.
Once again, I'd like to emphasize the point, when you make contact, rather than reaching with your arms, maintain short arms, move your body to your opponent, and then also the purpose of this is to work to secure some type of a tie. So you want to work with your arms as you make contact to secure some type of a tie. The next topic we're going to take a look at is the tie-up, and there are many different types of tie-ups. We're just going to look at a few basic ones. The first one we're going to look at is wrist control.
Let's look at some live examples of this wrist tie. In this example, 1993 world champion Sergei Martinov uses a wrist tie to set up an arm drag.
And the next one is a 2-on-1, very common tie-up. 2-on-1 with an under grab. We're going to look at a 2-on-1 with an over grab. And we'll look at that from another angle. One other thing to point out here, notice the right arm or the upper arm is pulling the elbow to the blue wrestler's body. That's a very important concept, the pulling of the tie, keeping the hips in.
Olympic champion Oleg Kucherenko moves from an underhook to secure an undergrab 2-on-1. Notice his pressure and hip position. Here we see Sergei Martinov secure an undergrab 2-on-1. Notice his hip position and pressure. Olympic and world champion Islam Deguchiev secures an overgrab 2-on-1 and uses it to post his opponent to the mat for the takedown. Here we see world and Olympic champion Mike Bowman secure an overgrab 2-on-1 with which he sets up this reach-around waist tackle.
The next one we're going to look at is an underhook. Underhook position. Now the basic position for the underhook there is very good. The hips are in. The underhook is being pulled high. Hips in and pull. And I'd like to just contrast that for a minute with the hips back, pushing, and driving in. That's a dangerous position, common position in freestyle and college style, but dangerous for Greco. It opens up their athlete to a lot of different types of throws. So control the tie with the pulling motion. If you want to move forward with the hips in. That's a real good position right there.
Look at Oleg Kucherenko's body position as he secures this underhook. Olympic silver medalist Alfred Termakian uses an underhook to set up this throw-by takedown.
And then the next off of that, we're going to look at a double underhook position. Principles are the same. Pull the tie up, or pull the lock high. Keep the hips in. Again, we'll contrast that with hips back, pushing and driving into the wrestler. Again, the red wrestler there is putting himself at risk a little bit. So back to good position, hips in, pull the tie. If he wants to move forward, he moves forward by moving forward with his hips.
Two-time Olympic gold medalist John Ronigan of Norway secures a double underhook on USA's Sean Sheldon. Look at his great position as he finishes it with his power twist for the takedown. USA's Buddy Lee steps in for a high dive as his opponent, Sergei Martinov, catches him in this double underhook. Notice the great outside penetration step as he elevates him for this great to-the-back finish. Once again at normal speed. Let's look at what happens when you're out of position on this underhook. Red is digging for an underhook, but his poor position allows his opponent to set up this arm throw.
Then the last tie we're going to look at is a pinch headlock, another real common tie-up in Greco-Roman wrestling. Key thing here, again, the principles are the same. Hips are in, pull with the tie. The inside elbow on the collar, you want to keep that elbow in tight on your opponent's chest compared to having the elbow up and high. That gives his opponent a chance to counterattack and relock.
Let's look at an example of this with Olympic champion Oleg Kucherenko of Russia. As he secures an underhook, he elevates it. Look at the great body position as he secures the pinch headlock and finishes it with this pinch headlock throw.
Next, we're going to talk about pummeling. Pummeling in Greco-Roman wrestling is a very important concept, also a concept that has been somewhat misunderstood. And we'll start out by defining pummeling as the process of fighting for a dominant control position with the purpose of scoring an offensive technique. To demonstrate, I'll bring my partner out here, and we'll just take a look at, first off, the common idea of pummeling is this. Both wrestlers are in and out, digging for underhooks, but as you can see, with that type of a pummel drill, neither wrestler is establishing dominant position. Now, if we do this drill and use this little method or technique to dig for an underhook and control an underhook and prevent our opponent from pummeling in, then that's a good technique because I've pummeled into a position where I've established dominant control with my underhook. Pummel back the other side, dominant control to a double underhook, which has made my pummeling count for a purpose. The other thing, when we look at pummeling for a purpose for dominant control, we want to not only control the tie-up position, but we also want to control with our hip position and also with our knee position. As you can see, my hip and legs here, I'm also making my opponent very uncomfortable because I'm not only controlling this, but I'm controlling the space here. Outside position, also inside position here. You can see again I've established dominant position here with my leg and also dominant position here with my tie-up. This process of pummeling, it's important to know different ways to clear ties. For instance, a 2-on-1 tie, if my opponent takes a 2-on-1 tie, he's established dominant position. He's pummeled here. He's ready to execute an offensive technique. He's putting me on the defensive. I need to do something to reverse this situation. Nice, clean, easy little technique. I'm going to pull my arm tight, trapping this arm. I'm going to go to the elbow, pull the elbow high, straighten out my arm, dig back underneath to an underhook position. So now I've pummeled back into an underhook out of a 2-on-1 position.
We have a good example of this from our last example of the pinch headlock. Red is secured to 2-on-1 on blue. Blue controls Red's elbow, moving his body carefully until he can reach into position for the underhook. Once secured, he drives the underhook high, pinch headlock, completes it with the throw.
Another position that's very important to learn how to wrestle out of or to pummel out of is an underhook position. If my opponent's controlling the underhook, from here, I'm going to bring my elbow down. I want to circle back just a little bit, create space, bring my arm back over the top, pummel back in.
Here in the final match of the 1992 Olympics between Hector Milan of Cuba and Dennis Kozlowski of the United States, we see a great example of an individual trying to fight for dominant control with this underhook, preventing the other opponent from getting one and yet trying to secure an underhook of your own. In this example of pummeling for dominant control, both opponents have secured an underhook. Blue circles away, clearing the underhook on his side so that he can drive back in to secure another one of his own for a double underhook. Steps in, uses a power twist for the takedown.
Same thing goes for a double underhook position. Again, I'm being controlled. I'm going to settle my hip back, pinch my arms here, circle, create a little bit of space, pummel back in, back to more of a dominant position. Now from the underhook or the double underhook position, if I try this technique where I circle my hips and try to pummel in and he stays tight, I need to try something different. Another way is this, reaching up to the head, pull the head, also blocking, trapping the knee a little bit. Now I've created the space I need to be able to pummel back in and clear my arm. Those are just a few ways to change positions, to fight back to a dominant control position. But once again, pummeling is the process of fighting for a dominant control position. A live action pummel drill is an excellent way for athletes to develop their pummel skills. You can do any time limit on this you'd like, and you can establish any purpose in any guideline. Like, for instance, your purpose for the day might be just to dig for the double underhook position. A 5-minute pummel match, the wrestler who gets to the double unders the most often wins the pummel match. There was 1 point for red, they continue to pummel, there's 1 point for blue, and so on and so forth. The purpose for the day might be to control the 2-on-1, pummeling for the 2-on-1, establish dominance, and that's 1 point blue. They come back, they wrestle more, there's 1 point red, and so on and so forth. The next skill we're going to take a look at is off-balancing. Off-balancing is another very important concept in Greco-Roman wrestling. The purpose of off-balancing is threefold. One, off-balancing for the direct score, off-balancing for the purpose of setting up an offensive score, and off-balancing for the purpose of establishing dominance on the feet. So we're going to take a look at a couple important things in off-balancing. First of all, one concept that you want to communicate in off-balancing is the concept of creating pressure and then reversing that pressure. Without pressure, it's very hard for me to off-balance and take my opponent out of position. But if I can make contact and if I can push, and now the idea of pushing also is pushing under control, and it goes back to basic position. If I'm here leaning, I'm pushing out of control, and my opponent can snap and off-balance me. So when you push and make contact, this leg goes forward, hip position solid, I'm controlling my tie, I'm pushing. As I push, I create pressure, and then very simply I can reverse that pressure to off-balance my opponent. Pressure, reverse the pressure, pressure, reverse the pressure. A couple little drills, position drills that you can use with your athletes to help them learn to off-balance their opponent are these. Again, this very simple one, a 2-on-1, pressure, create pressure, push, 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 change it up, step back, pull their opponent to the mat. Bicep collar tie, again, keeping that elbow tight, pressure, push, push, create pressure, snap down, off balance. Under-over position is a very common position. Now from this position, again, maintaining good position with the feet, pushing forward a little bit, pressure here, and then off balance back to the side. So we went from the first two attacks, pressure in, pull back. Now this is a little bit different in that we're pulling sideways and then pulling back sideways again here to take our opponent off balance. Another little way you can off balance your opponent, will use a head and arm attack or a collar arm attack. Going to control a head and an arm here and just back pedal and circle, take my opponent right off his feet, right to the mat. And along the same line, from the same position, we're going to start with that kind of pressure here. He resists back. I've created pressure this way. I'm going to come right back to off-balance my opponent this way. All these examples, you can see the concept of create pressure one way, snap back the opposite way.
Let's look at several good examples of this off-balancing or change of direction technique.
Again, we can use a live action drill any period of time to help the wrestlers develop the ability to off-balance their opponent. Again, in this drill, the object is to take their opponent all the way to the mat. Every time they get a snap down or an off-balance where their opponent goes to the mat, the wrestler gets 1 point. You go for 5 minutes and keep score. Again, just to key in on the ability to develop the off-balance technique. The next basic skill we're going to take a look at is the penetration step. And we're going to look at 2 penetration steps that apply directly to Greco-Roman wrestling. The first one is an inside step penetration step that leads to a high dive. And here's a demonstration of that step. Now notice as the athlete does this penetration step, the differences. Once he steps, leads, penetrates, follows up, plants, locks and lifts backwards and changes his direction. If we contrast that with the freestyle inside step penetration, we see the athlete driving in and through his opponent. Back to the Greco-Roman high dive penetration step. Now we can drill this with the partner. We'll bring the partner in, and the partner will just present his body, and the driller will step, lock, and lift. You can see how that applies directly to a high dive or any type of a body attack in Greco-Roman wrestling. Very common.
Here's a variety of looks at this inside penetration step. Notice that sometimes this inside penetration is achieved as much by a drop step of the opposite leg as it is by a step forward by the strategic placement of the leg to begin with.
The second penetration step we're going to take a look at is an outside step penetration. This is very common in most body attacks in Greco-Roman wrestling. It's common in a duck under, reach arounds, arm drags. We see this penetration step here without a partner. Step outside and then turns the corner, makes a 90-degree angle. And now we'll look at that with the training partner. Again, the training partner presents himself. We just drill step to the outside. Very important that the athlete turns the corner on this. Turns the corner, goes behind, locks and secures the hip. Very effective, very important penetration step in Greco-Roman wrestling.
Let's look at some examples of this outside penetration. Notice in all of these that the placement of this outside foot or outside leg is essential to the proper turning of the corner to finish the technique.
Here are some very common body attacks in Greco-Roman wrestling. We're going to start around with a very simple reach-around attack, very high percentage, very simple technique. Starting from a 2-on-1, the athlete is going to reach around with an outside penetration step, and then turn the corner, secure the hip. Very effective, very clean technique. And the next technique we're going to look at is an arm drag. We're going to start from more of an open tie with an outside penetration step with an arm drag. Let's take a look at an arm drag with an inside step. Inside step. Following it up in a belly-to-belly position rather than a belly-to-back position. And the next common body attack we're going to look at is a duck under. And there's a duck under out of a bicep tie. I look at a duck under out of a common pummel attack. Wrestlers are digging for underhook position. The duck under comes out of that quite nicely.
Notice that the level change in this duck under is accomplished by dropping from the hips and knees, not by bending over, which would put you out of position.
And the next attack is similar to a duck under. It's a slide-by attack. Again, from an over-underhook tie. Wrestler's going to do a slide-by with an outside penetration step, then turns the corner, finishes in a belly-to-back position. Important once the athlete turns the corner to secure the hip with a tight lock. Again, if you can, get that opponent up in the air, take him to the mat, talk about finishes later. And the last body attack we'll look at is a high dive attack, another high percentage technique. From a 2-on-1, we see a nice inside step high dive attack. From a 2-on-1 the other side, do the same thing. took a look at common body attacks, and I think now is an appropriate time to talk about centering, which is another very important concept in Greco-Roman wrestling. Centering has been likened to a sprawl in freestyle, and we refer to centering as the Greco sprawl. Let me just show you an example of what I'm talking about. In all of the body attacks that we just saw, the attacker, it's important for him to control the hip. On a reach-around body attack, if he can control the hip, turn the corner and lock me up, he's beaten me, and he's going to score. Centering is this little idea right here. He reaches. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drop my hip, center it back and away, and square up. So, again, if we liken it to a freestyle attack to the legs, if my opponent attacks my legs, I'm going to sprawl my leg back and adjust back to position. Since the main attack in Greco is not a leg attack but a body attack, I've got to sprawl something else back, and that something else is my hip. So once again, reach around attack, hips back and away. I'm going to recover back up to some kind of an attack control position. See the same thing on an arm drag attack. He attacks, he goes for the hip, center the hip back and away, circle, 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 fight right back into an underhook. You can do the same thing with the high dive, with the duck under, settling that hip back and away, struggling back to a good solid base position. As a live action drill, you can drill with a partner. First start off with the offensive. He drills this, controls the hip, goes behind. Then maybe do that for 30 seconds. The next 30 seconds, it's time for me to drill my Greco sprawl. He does the reach around. Yeah, I do my hip reaction, give him the arm. He does the hip reaction again, give him the arm, reach around, hip reaction again, just to develop that centering action.
Here are some examples of this centering or Greco sprawl technique.
The next area we're going to take a look at are common finishes from the body. This is the part that makes Greco-Roman a real exciting sport. We're going to look at the different finishes. There's a lot of, you can do these finishes out of a lot of different body attacks, but for purposes of the film, we're going to use one body attack per finish. We're going to do an arm drag body attack to a waist tackle. And the second finish from the body we're going to look at is a hip swing finish. We're going to use a high dive setup. And the next finish we're going to take a look at is a crackback finish, again with the high dive setup. Okay, the next finish we're going to look at is the throw-by finish. Again, we're going to set it up with a high dive attack. Okay, now let's take a look at a power twist with an arm drag body attack. Next is a belly to back from a reach around. And we'll take a look at a belly-to-belly finish, duck under to a belly-to-belly. As you can see, there's a lot of power and skill involved in these finishes from the body. So here's a couple drills you can do with your athletes to help them be real comfortable in a belly-to-belly position. The bridge has been referred to as the foundation of Greco-Roman wrestling. If we look at a direct application for the bridge, we can see it in many areas. Two of the key areas, though, one is in any type of a back arch throw. The other one is in a gut wrench. It's very important, and as we go through the bridge, that we teach our athletes to bridge correctly, and a couple principles that we want to lay down right from the very beginning. First of all, we want to have a good, solid foot base. The athlete's heels are fairly close to his butt, not extended out here, but we want to pull them up fairly tight to the butt, flat-footed, as you can see. When we start the bridge and start to make the bridge, a basic principle that you want to follow is that the knee should not go in front of the toe. You want the knee above the toe, and then we're going to make the bridge by pushing up and back, so that the angle of the knee should go from here back up to here.
And as the athlete goes up into his bridge, he made the bridge by pushing with his feet, pushing with the thighs and hips up into his bridge. Now, to teach the athlete to bridge correctly and in a way that applies to specific technique, we want to constantly emphasize the hip and the thigh push right here. So we're going to come down, touch the shoulders to the mat. I'm going to have the athlete touch his shoulders to the mat, elevate his hips right there. Now, to make the bridge, he's going to push up using his thighs and hips. Push up, come back, touch the shoulders, keep the hips elevated. Now, if they have problems in this position, they can use their hands to steady themselves on the mat. Push, touch, push, touch. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to have them put their hands on the mat and make the bridge by pushing up with their hands. We want to teach the wrestler to use his thighs and hips out of a bridge position. This is where the power comes from. Push, touch, shoulders, push.
Here's an example of the bridge as used in the gut wrench technique.
And here are a couple drills to help your athletes develop a good, strong bridge. A flip-flop drill. And another drill is running the pike. If your wrestler's having a difficult time doing the flip-flops, you can gradually work him into it by putting him up against the wall. And when he gets comfortable with a certain level on the wall, he can move his head away a little bit more. And practice, and then move it away a little bit more. His feet go down closer to the floor, a little bit more. And a little bit more. Until your wrestler's ready to do the flip-flop all by himself. Next, we're going to take a look at a back arch, and in emphasizing the back arch, there's one point that we need to look at, and that's the momentum of the back arch. Again, we're going to key in on the knees, and when the wrestler does his back arch, the knees should not go in front of the toes. The arch should be up and back compared to a down and forward motion. Common mistake when wrestlers start to do this back arch is they want to drop their knees forward. So we'll take a look at a good example, and we'll take a look at a bad example. First of all, a good example of a back arch. Again, focus in on the knee position. Nice fluid arch. Wrestler's going to come back up. I'd like to make one other point. As the wrestler starts his back arch position, notice how he lowers his hips a little bit and then extends the hips, goes up into the back arch. Knee position's real good. It's a fluid motion. Now we'll take a look at an example of what happens when the wrestler's force is down and forward. Watch the knee position. As you can see, the momentum goes forward, and as he goes into his back arch, he stalls a little bit. It's not a real fluid motion. One more bad example, and then we'll come back to a good example. Again, focus in on the knee position. Here are some drills for developing the back arch throw. First one is a partner drill, where one partner holds his partner's hands to give him a little bit of confidence. Here we have an example of this part of the skill being mastered. I'd like to use this opportunity also to take a look at what happens when a wrestler's not ready to go on to the next step. It's important that the wrestler goes all the way through with this and do a full back arch. If he pulls his head, flattens his head, or flattens his back, it could be a dangerous sign that he's not ready to go on to the next step. So coaches make sure that they master each skill before they go on. There we have a good one. Now he's ready for the next step. He's going to try it on his own, but his partner is going to spot him on the lower part of his back. Notice too that when the back archer is drilling, he uses his hands to take up some of the impact from his head. One other thing that needs to be mentioned, again, the importance of going all the way through with this there's a counterbalance that takes place as the hips go up and the head goes down. There's a counterbalance that makes landing on the head very painless and very smooth motion. All right, now the wrestler's ready for the next step. He's going to use a crash pad. Again, using his hands without a spotter, going into the crash pad to a nice arch. And when he's comfortable with that and has mastered that, he's ready to do it all by himself on the mat. Now we're going to take a look at the back step. The back step is a penetration step that we use to do back step throws. There's several different types of throws that we use out of a back step, and we'll look at those in detail later. But for right now, we're just going to focus in on the skill of the back step. Again, back step is a penetration step. We want to start with a good stance and good position. Again, we lower the hips. We're going to start and step and penetrate like a regular penetration step, and as we do that, notice that the hips are still low. So we have a level change involved here. This level change should be maintained throughout the entire back step. Come back to stance, hips are low, step and penetrate. We've got a level change. Now the next step is this. We start in our stance, step and penetrate. Now we're going to bring our back leg and bring our toe to our heel. We're actually going to cross over. There's not many times in wrestling where you cross over. This is one of them. Low, step and penetrate, toe to heel. Low, step and penetrate, toe to heel. Now, the next step is the pivot, and when we do the pivot, there's two things we want to keep in mind. One is when we pivot, we want to pivot on the balls of our feet, not flat-footed. We've got to be able to make that turn. The next thing is that we're going to make a 180-degree turn, so I start out penetrating towards that wall. When I'm done, I'm going to be facing that wall. And then the last thing we want to key in on with the pivot is the power. If we think of a hockey player throwing a hip check, when we do this pivot, we want to throw our hips through, and that momentum from the hips is going to cause us to be able to spin and pivot all the way through. So here's how it looks when we put it together. Low stance, step and penetrate, level change, toe to heel, hip pivot. Now, there's one other point that we need to talk about. Notice after the hip pivot or the back step is done, that my weight is on the balls of my feet and I'm slightly leaning forward. This is the correct position. You want the weight going forward, step, toe to heel, pivot, slightly going forward compared to this. Step, pivot. And again, when we do our throws, we'll see that that position, this position right here, this coiled, loaded position is very important in order to execute a powerful back step throw. Okay, now we're going to look at a hip hop, and again, we're going to look at hip hops more in detail when we start to do throws, because really the hip hop is the dynamic in the heart of all throws. That's where the power comes from. But for drilling purposes and basic skill purposes, it's very important. We'll look at hip hop from two different positions. First, from a body lock position. My partner's going to bring his feet together, hand at his side, and he's just going to present himself here. I'm going to come up and take a position with my hips in. I'm going to drop, lock, and here's the hip hop. Again, a hip hop's an explosive motion. What you want to try to do is you want to try to bounce his hips right off your hips, and if you can see an explosive pop, the wrestler's probably doing it correct. We can compare a hip pop to a hip lift, and you can see the difference. A hip pop is not an easy lift. This is a lift. A hip pop is explosive, drop lock, pop. And again, you can probably judge the power of the hip pop by how much the partner's hips come off of the hip popper's hips.
This hip pop to a high arch finish from his duck under won a gold medal for Attila Repka from Hungary in the 1992 Olympics.
Okay, now we'll take a look at a hip hop from a back step position. Same thing, we're going to step here, back step in, and just an explosive punch from this coiled position. Now again, look for that explosive pop. That's the key. Again, here's an example of just a hip lift. Same position, here, that slow lift. We want to do an explosive, powerful hip hop. Pop. All right, the next skill area we're going to look at are grips. Grips are very important, often not paid much attention to. But the first grip we're going to look at that's very important for Greco-Roman wrestling is simply a knuckle lock grip. Clasp the knuckles here. This grip of all grips allows for the most extension and the most mobility. You can tighten this grip up by pinching the elbows and pulling in tight with the arms. You can make it loose and long when you need leverage. And there's many, many areas that this type of a grip is very important, and the ability to go tight, to loosen it up, to go tight. And we'll talk more about that in detail later as we get into certain techniques. But one other thing about this grip is many young wrestlers don't like this grip because it feels very uncomfortable for them, but they're limited if they don't learn to use this. It takes away, again, their mobility and potential for learning some important advanced techniques. The second grip would be a hand clasp grip, which again allows for a fair amount of extension, not quite as much as this, but a fair amount. Harder to change up, but in certain cases, very important. Then we'll take to a butterfly grip, where we're going to take and actually cup the forearms here. Again, this grip, we see this in gut wrenches quite often. When we need a tight, secure lock, when we know that we don't need to extend and change our grip very often, we know we're going to get a tight grip, we need to keep it tight, very secure. Again, with this grip and with all grips, when it's time to tighten them up, pinching the elbows and pulling tight here makes that space even tighter and smaller. So those are the three basic grips that we'll key in on here out in Greco-Roman wrestling. The first type of throw we're going to take a look at is a back arch throw. There's three elements, key elements to the back arch throw. The first is the bridge, and the bridge we can look at as being the foundation of the throw. The second thing is the back arch, and the back arch, keep in mind that the back arch is the follow-through for the throw. And the third part, probably the most important part, is the hip pop. And the hip pop is the dynamic or the power for the throw. When a wrestler's mastered those three skills, he's ready to go on and to do the back arch throw. So we'll start with the bridge. And again, as we talked about in the basic skill tape, we've got certain ways we want our athletes to do the bridge. Feet about 4 or 6 inches from the waist, a good solid foot base. Elevate the hips. You can elevate the hips, keep his shoulders down on the mat. He's going to make the bridge by pushing with his thighs and his hips. And we'll do the bridge technique. Feet could come a little bit closer to the body. Again, one of the things that we want to keep in mind through this entire progression is that the force in all of these skills should be up and back, compared to down and forward. Again, the principle is this: the knee can go above the toe, but the knee shouldn't go in front of the toe. Again, you can see in the bridge, the knee comes forward, and then pushing into the bridge, the knee's up and back. All right, so the second skill then, when the wrestlers mastered the bridge, we go to the back arch. We start out with the two-handed back arch drill. Wrestler's going to step in. Now, before he starts, he's going to step in. He's going to change his level. This is an important part of this. And then he's going to start his back arch by extending up with his thighs, and he's going to go right into his back arch motion. Very good. And again, we want to key in on the knees and the hips. Make sure that there's a force going up as he goes into his arch. And the other thing we want to key in is on the knee to make sure the force is going up and back. And one more time, we'll show an example of poor back arch skills with the knees going down and forward. Notice the force going down. Notice the bridge is not real fluid. So again, one more good back arch, down and up. And now we're ready to go to the next step. We have to add a turn to complete the back arch. So we're going to go with a one-handed back arch. The wrestler's going to start in pretty much the same position, good low hip position. One-handed, he's going to arch. This time we're going to add a roll through. He's going to turn away from his opponent or from his partner. Steps in, good solid position. Again, key in on the knees. Nice fluid back arch. As you notice too, as we do this, the back arch drills, that there's a counterbalance that takes place. Now, the key part with the counterbalance is this low hip position, and as he arches back, he explodes up with the hips. As the hips go up, the head goes back down to the mat, and it really lessens up the impact on the head. Now what we'll look at here is a poor example of the bridge. Now, if the wrestler starts with low hips, starts to bring his hips up, going into the back arch, it's all or nothing here. If he pulls his head or if he flattens his back, he's going to land hard on the mat, and we're going to see how we take away from that counterbalance. So you must stress to your athletes that when they do this, they've got to do a full arch, looking back, going all the way through with it. All right, now the next step again, the next step will be doing the same back arch, roll through without a partner. Same position. And for safety purposes, you can see that the wrestler's using his hands, especially when they're first learning this, to make sure that they have the confidence to do this. Again, at any point in time, when the wrestler's not developed in these skills, the coach can come back. We can use a coach or a training partner to spot the athlete. And he can also use a crash pad if that's possible to, as a safety feature here, give him a little more confidence and arch through until he's confident to do it on the mat all by himself. Now go ahead and do a couple more on the mat here all by yourself. Good arch, good counterbalance. The final step in the progression is the hip pop. And for the hip pop drill, what we're going to do is we're going to have one passive partner and one active partner. The passive partner is going to present himself with his feet together. He's going to drop one arm to his side, the other arm up, and his partner, the hip hop driller, is going to walk up, he's going to straddle with a foot on each side, and then before he changes level, he's going to be chest to chest, hip to hip, belly to belly. There should be no space here. That's the first part. The second thing is he's going to drop, change his level. Now he's going to lock and pull. And see how he sits back, and then hip hop. And notice again how the motion and the force is up and back. A very important point in being able to execute the body lock at this point. This skill is very important for the wrestler to develop. Common mistakes with the hip hop, wrestlers will want to come and take a lock, and they'll be all tight and nervous in here. They'll be moving around with their feet. They'll want to jump in and try to throw the guy. We want to avoid that. We want to take away the anxiety. We want to just do a gradual progression into this. If a kid's doing that, just back them up. Say, just listen, relax, come up. The progression with the hip hop is chest to chest, straddle, drop, lock, pull, hip pop. Don't let them lock before they get their hips into position. The hip position is really important in this. Drop, lock and pull, and pop. Very good. Now, one other part of this, I want you to take a look at this lock and pull action. Blue is going to drop, he's going to lock and pull, but now he's going to let go of his lock. Notice how he starts to fall backwards. I want to contrast that with a common problem. Blue's going to take a lock now, and he's going to bend his opponent forward and backwards. Now, if he does a hip hop from this position, hip hop, and if he goes forward as a follow-through, you can be pretty certain that his force is not up and back, that he's moving forward and away. One other key little thought with this, the hip hop is not a pop directly into the wrestler. You're not pushing him out and away. You're pulling and you're popping up and over the back. So again, if Blue takes this and he pops his hip in and falls forward, okay, that was a good hip hop. This time Blue's going to take a lock. He's going to pop the hips out and forward, and you can watch him go forward. Again, that's the opposite direction that we want to go. Drop, lock, pull, pop. Very good. Now, when we've mastered that skill, the wrestler's ready to do the body lock throw. Crash pads are real good at this point. We want to pull a crash pad out, have a coach present, and for learning purposes, again, we're going to have the partner present himself again in this position here. Feet together, hand at the side, and we're going to have the thrower in front of him, and start it the exact same way we just did our hip hop drill. Chest to chest, hip to hip, drop, lock, hip hop, and go. One other thing that needs to be mentioned at this point in time is that generally speaking, you'll want to train, you'll always want to throw to the trapped arm side. So train your athletes to roll through on the trapped arm side. Okay, now we're ready to put it all together. Drop, lock, pull, hip hop, and through. This is a simple, easy method for teaching the body lock throw, a method that gives the athletes confidence, takes away their anxiety. This is probably the most difficult throw, but also a technique that is rewarded with the highest amount of points.
Here's a great example of this belly-to-belly throw with Sergei Demyashkevich of Russia, world champion in 1990.
We've just seen a back arch throw from the belly-to-belly position. Once an athlete's mastered this throw, it can be thrown from any part of the body. It can be thrown from the front, from the side, and from the back. Since we've already seen the belly-to-belly position, we're going to go on and show a side throw and two throws from the back that are very common in Greco-Roman wrestling. The first one we're going to look at is a step-around body lock. Again, step-around body lock describes itself. The wrestlers are going to start from an over-under lock. The thrower is going to step around to one side, so he's on the side of his opponent. He blocks the leg just for a moment, and then he's going to do hip hop into a belly to back. And this time we're going to do one more, and he's just going to continue with the motion. We looked at body attacks earlier. Any type of an attack that takes you to the body, you can throw out of that and turn it into a high amplitude throw. Now we're going to look at a belly to back position, which I think has scared many coaches off. But the first belly to back we're going to do is going to be straight over the top for 5 points. Now a couple things before we do this. You want to have the opponent's feet off the mat before you go into this throw. The hip hop in this is not as important as it is in a belly to belly or a belly to side position. The important thing is that the feet are off and that there's a high arch and that it's a controlled throw. The other thing is where the wrestler locks is very important. If the wrestler locks higher on his opponent's back, it's going to be harder to take him over through the air. So you really want to lock down on the waist as low as you can for maximum effectiveness in this throw. And we'll just see an example here. The feet come off, get the feet off, pause for a second, and a nice controlled back arch right through. Now, when you're teaching athletes how to do this throw, You need to constantly let them know that they need to cooperate with their partners, that the safety of their partner is in their hands. On this particular throw, the man being thrown needs to just tuck his head and do a back roll all the way through. You should prepare him how to fall a little bit. And we'll look at that one more time. Again, notice the ease of the motion. There's not a hip hop. The wrestler doesn't rush the throw, gets his feet off the ground, and goes right into his belly to back for 5 points.
Here's 1989 world silver medalist Mike Ford of the USA with a great example of this belly to back throw. World and Olympic champion Oleg Kucherenko of Russia uses a lift to perform these examples of a belly-to-back throw.
Now we're going to look at another belly to back. This time we're going to go from a side position. Instead of taking it all the way over the top, the wrestler is going to be at a 90-degree angle to his partner. And the key thing here that we want to emphasize is the tightness of the lock. We want to make sure that when the thrower does the back arch, that he rotates and brings his opponent's hips all the way through with them. Hip pop is important here. Hip pop and tightness. So we want even more explosion than that. Powerful hip pop, and explode and rotate your opponent through the air as quick and as powerfully as you can. Hip pop.
We're going to look at several examples of a lift which goes to the side position for this belly to back throw.
The next back arch throw we're going to look at is a sag body lock. And first of all, in the progression of teaching the sag, the belly-to-belly body lock should be mastered first. The sag should come later. It's a little bit more of an advanced throw. But I'd like to show a continuation of a method. After they've mastered a back arch throw, you can bring them in and do a sag. But the very first thing that we'd like to do with that is just make sure that their body position is correct. So we're going to take one partner, and again, he's going to present himself to his partner, wide base, one hand at his side. Now, the driller is going to step in. Now, at this point in time, what we need to look at here, notice he's penetrating at the same side that he's trapping the arm. Now, what we want to do is it's a sag body lock, so sagging or hanging of the thrower's weight is very important. We want to get him used to that. So he's going to pick his feet up and then plant. Pick his feet up, plant, and lift. Pick his feet up, plant, and lift. Then you can add the lift. Now, a couple things, maybe we can turn just sideways here, get another angle. A couple other things is the hip position. The driller's hips should be tight with his opponent's hips. Now, if he sags his hips, this is not good position. So it takes a fair amount of torso strength and arm strength for the wrestler to be able to hang and keep his hips high. Now, there's better position now. Plant the feet and lift. And notice at all times, the drilling wrestler here is always in good, solid position. Even when he sets his partner down, lifts his feet, he's always got a good foot base and always ready to react to whatever his partner's doing. Okay, now the next step in this, we can start from that same position. We want to add the throw, and really with the sag body lock, it's important again that you get a deep lock on the waist, that the person being thrown feels that heavy weight on their body, and we're gonna have our red wrestler take position again and step in a good solid position, feet lightly on the ground. His opponent is carrying his weight. His opponent should have a lot of weight on this foot especially. Now, to do the sag throw, the thrower is going to pull to his right or to the underhook side slightly, and then he's going to do a good hip explosion, hip pop, and he's going to throw through to the trapped arm side. And come up again. We'll look at that at a little bit quicker speed. Again, this is a little bit more advanced throw, but I think if you take the athletes through it step by step, they should be able to pick it up quite well. The next category of throw we're going to look at is the back step throw. There's three different ways we're going to use the back step. One is we're going to use the back step to lift or hip pop. The second is we're going to use the back step to spin, and we're going to use the back step to drop. Very quickly, I'll show you an example of each penetration step. The back step throw, which is the throw where you get the high elevation, high amplitude, is we're going to make a 180-degree turn. Again, good low stance, step and penetrate, toe to heel pivot in this solid position. So we make a 180-degree turn. On the back step spin, the hips have to clear all the way through, so we want to do a 3/4 turn. That was a half turn. Now we're going to do a 3/4 turn. A little bit more powerful hip rotation step. Again, back to a 3/4 turn. The final one is the back step to a drop, step and penetrate, and from here we're just going to throw the hips through and drop right to the knees. So those are the three basic penetration steps we're going to use for back step throws. We're going to start out teaching an arm throw, but before we do that, we have to go through the steps. We have to make sure the athlete has mastered all the skills. The first skill is a back step. Again, the back step with a half turn. The athlete's going to step, heel to toe, penetrate, real good position, weight slightly going forward, step, back step, pivot through. The second step of this, once he's mastered the back step, he's just going to add a little spring, and he's going to explode and jump forward as he makes his turn. He's in a good solid position. Very important now, too, to maintain that low level all the way through the pivot, because that's where the power's coming from. If the athlete has straight legs when he turns the corner, there's not going to be a jump, or he's going to have to readjust, back down, squat down again and jump. So he needs to stay low and tight. Step, turn the corner, explode, up and out. Okay, good. Then the next step, we're going to bring a partner out, and the partner is just going to, again, present himself, a good wide base. He's going to present his arm out. Now, a couple things when we do this. For penetration purposes, it's not to the thrower's advantage to penetrate deep between his legs. If he does that, his hips are going to get caught on his opponent's hips. There has to be some space here, and later we're going to look at a little bit of space here, at least at the beginning of the throw. So when we step and penetrate, we want to step between our opponent's legs, maybe an inch or an inch and a half in front of his toes, again, just to leave space for the hips. And step, penetrate, okay. And even without the arm, Vanny. Step without the arm to begin with, just getting them used to stepping in tight and close, step and penetrate. Okay, now one time we're just going to take a look at a deep penetration step, step deep, and again, he gets caught up with the hips. One other common mistake that young wrestlers will make is they'll step outside, especially when they start grabbing the arm. They'll step outside, they'll bring their hips out, back, and through, and we want to avoid that. So again, back step, proper back step, step in, clears the hips, and again, the weight is going out and forward. All right, now the next step we're going to do is we're going to just take the arm, since we're doing an arm throw, going to grab here at the elbow. He's going to step in. His far shoulder is going to come underneath the armpit. Step, and good position. He's going to lift his opponent and walk forward. Now, one other thing in teaching this, another common area where athletes make mistakes on this is they'll grab the arm, they'll step, and they'll get themselves all tight here with their shoulder, and they'll try to jam this through. So what you want to teach them to do is to dip that shoulder and throw that arm underneath at the same time. See how we've got space here? We've got space here. Arm through, dip the shoulder. Now we make it tight. We lift and go. Step, penetrate, dip the shoulder, and then it becomes tight again. And you can lock, grab, lift, walk forward. Now we can add a little bit of a hip hop, the same thing, just a little more explosion to it. Step, hip hop, very good. Now when we're at this point, the wrestler is ready to do the throw. So again, we're going to pull a crash pad out. Again, this is a high amplitude throw. So we want to take our opponent all the way through the air. We want to get a good explosion and land him in a danger position. Step, all the way up. Again, and as the wrestler is drilling this back step arm throw, you want to constantly emphasize height, elevation, height and elevation. Work for explosion, get him up in the air. Very good, excellent. A couple other variations we'll take a quick look at here with this high amplitude back step throws. Headlock throw is another throw you can do with the same foundation, the same back step, just doing something a little bit different up top. Hips are in the same position. Again, you're exploding, you're taking your opponent through the air. We can also do a shoulder throw. When we refer to a shoulder throw, everything is the same as the arm throw, except instead of putting the shoulder underneath your opponent's armpit, you're going to wrap his arm right around your shoulder. And there we go. See if maybe we can't get another view of that. And stop right there. You can see how the arm is wrapped around the shoulder rather than underneath. Another real common back step throw is a hip toss from an underhook position. Hips are back, a little bit of space, back step in. So those are just a few examples of high amplitude back step throws.
As you watch the following examples of the arm throw, pay particular attention to the pressure and position their opponents are assuming, which helps or assists in their executing the throw.
The next back step throw we're going to take a look at is the spin. And again, at the teaching progression, we're going to start out with the basic back step, but this time, instead of making a half turn, we're going to have the athlete do a back step to where he makes a three-quarter turn. This is very important because as we look back on our back step throw, it was very important that the hips be centered underneath our opponent's hips in order to get that lift and high amplitude. On the arm spin, however, it's very important that the hips aren't underneath, but that the hips come all the way through so that we clear it. The next thing we want to do in a teaching progression is a back step to a shoulder roll. Again, since we're not going up and through the air, we want the athlete getting used to coming down and rolling through. Back step to a shoulder roll, back step to a shoulder roll. So again, if we look at the difference between the back step throw and the back step spin, it was very important for the athlete to back step through on the throw, exploding up and out. Now in the back step spin, the athlete's going to back step through and actually go down and roll to the mat. Okay, now we're going to bring our training partner in and continue on with the progression. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the arm spin position with the grab on the elbow. Now, with the arm spin now, we're going to keep this in mind. The thrower is going to wrap his opponent's arm around his neck. Everything else applies. We don't want to penetrate too deep. We're going to dip the shoulder, make sure it gets through. And again, instead of positioning the thrower's hips here, the hips should come all the way out and through. And we're just going to step that far, just to position. Come back, step to position. Now right here we have to make, that's a pretty good back step, but we can make an adjustment by having the athlete pull his feet a little bit closer in, tight, nope, not out, in towards, there you go. Okay, and come back again. A common mistake that athletes do when they start to do the spin is when they spin through, they spin their hips through, they'll back and away with their hips. And that's actually the opposite of where we need to finish this. Again, let's do a back step from another angle. Okay, we back step through. We've got a good position now. When the thrower's in this position, the next thing, the momentum should come forward and across. You should continue a spin, almost in a roll-type motion, forward and across the man's body. And we have a proper arm spin. I'd like to illustrate one other point on this, and it has to do with the direction of the throw. Once the wrestler spins through, if his hips go back and away, notice there's a lot of pressure and stress on the arms, but his opponent's body is doing nothing. His feet are solid. Now we're going to come back and look at the leverage with the finish going forward and across. Forward and across, you can actually see how there's control over the whole body as he starts to go forward and across the man's body. So that's a real important coaching point in teaching the arm spin. One more time, we'll take a look at the whole thing all the way through.
Even though he was stopped partway through on this arm throw, by being in proper position, he was able to power through and still get the finish.
The last back step throw we're going to look at is a back step drop throw. We're going to do a back step drop arm throw. So we're going to start out with the basic skill of a back step drop step. And again, we're going to make a half turn, step, penetrate, this time throw the hip through, and the wrestler should just drop to his knees. If the wrestler has a hard time with this drop step pivot, another drill you can do is they can start on their knees. You can have them jump up and just spin through the air. And you can have them do that in repetition and changing directions. Nice little drill for getting them used to just pivoting those hips through, landing on their knees. Then bring them back up. They can do their back step, drop, throw, step, penetrate, throw the hips through and drop. And we'll try it all in one motion without bringing the toe to the heel. Step, drop. Again, we're making a half circle. Okay, now we're ready to bring the partner in and complete the throw. Again, since we're doing an arm throw, we're going to start with the same tie on the elbow. But now the important thing now, the thrower is going to lead with his right leg. Again, that's his penetration leg. We're going to save a step. We're going to make this a quick little throw. The other thing that's very important is that the thrower should create some pressure when he feels his opponent pressuring back in, and especially if his opponent is extending himself a little bit and getting himself out of position. That's really an excellent time to do this throw. So he creates pressure. He feels the pressure back from his opponent. He's just going to do his little drop step, dip his shoulder underneath, and go all the way through with it. Very quick. So actually what you're doing is you're creating pressure, waiting for your opponent to pressure back, drop underneath him so that your opponent's pressure actually takes him through and he helps you do this throw. A good way to illustrate this to your wrestlers is just like this. You can say, here's what you're doing. You have your wrestler put his hands behind his back, put your hand on his chest, and just say, lean, trust me, trust me, trust me, because this is what you're doing. You're creating pressure, getting your partner to pressure back in, then you're dropping right underneath them. And then you can go back and let them try to drill that again. So the shoulder pressure, leading with the foot, creating the pressure, and then dropping underneath is very important. In fact, if the pressure's not there, it's not a good time to do the throw.
Here's several examples of this back step, drop step for an arm throw.
The next type of throw we're going to look at is a pivot throw, and we're actually going to look at two types of pivot throws. When we do the pivots, the pivot on the balls of the feet is important, but most importantly, we want to be able to generate power through our leg into our hip. A lot of power right here. So a little drill you can do with your athletes before you get into the pivot throws is this. Get them in a good position, have them settle and drop their hips. We're just going to turn the hip down to the mat, power the hip through. And as you can see, as I power the hip through, how it torques and moves my whole body. There's a lot of power in this simple little motion. Good drill to get them started, learn how to use their hips. The two penetration pivot steps that we're going to use to actually do the throws look like this. The first one, it's a straight penetration step, and some of our other throws, it was important to bend the hips. Actually, on this technique, you actually want to be straight. Here, we're going to step and penetrate, turn the toe, pivot the hip all the way through. Again, we want to make a half circle. I start facing this wall. I do my penetration step, powerful pivot, torquing that hip all the way through. The second penetration step for pivots looks like this, a little bit different. We're going to step and penetrate here, leave the trail leg, and actually on this one we want a little bit more change of level, trail the leg, and just rotating. If you think of a rotator on a washing machine on this type of a throw, it helps and makes sense. You want to avoid any type of an arch. You want your back, your torso straight. Step and penetrate, quick pivot. Step and penetrate, quick pivot. Okay, now we're going to bring the athletes out and take a look at these two. We're going to start out with that first penetration step. We're going to start out with a technique called a pinch headlock. This is actually a type of a reverse headlock. So the athlete's going to secure a pinch headlock position right here on his opponent. Now, one of the things that's important on this is his far forearm is going to go right across the back shoulder blade, and he wants to pull the athlete on top of his body, extend this leg deeper, and lean back just a little bit, and then he's just going to execute that first little pivot motion with his foot. Pivot, follow it right up to his back. A lot of leverage involved in this type of technique. Very effective technique right now in Greco-Roman wrestling, and actually quite easy to execute. Secure the lock tight, step and pivot and twist. He takes the athlete right to his back. Then the next pivot throw, another real popular technique in the sport, can be used for off-balancing as well as a scoring technique, is the under-overhook pivot. So we're going to step into an under-overhook lock, step deep, penetrate. Now in this one, we want a little bit of level change in the hip, but it's important that the hip is underneath here so that there's no space. And now we're just going to he's going to do a quick pivot and rotate just like a washing machine. One of the common mistakes, I guess, that young athletes do when they start doing this type of a throw is they want to do an arch in here, and it's not an arch. It works on a rotator type of a principle. So one more time, we'll take a look at that. Okay. And again, straight up and down. I'd like to point out another little thing here. The rotation the pull should be to the underhook side, and also your trail leg should be on the underhook side. You want to leave as much ability to twist as possible. If the wrestler leads with this other leg and drops this leg and tries to pull to his left, he's very limited in the rotation, maybe a quarter rotation, whereas if he leads with this and rotates, he can make almost at least a half rotation, possibly 3/4 rotation. So one more time, we'll look at it, pop, pull, twist them all the way through.
Let's look at some variations of this pivot throw.
The first technique we're going to take a look at is the gut wrench technique. And before we start, the bridge is the foundation of the gut wrench. Very important, the application of this basic skill leads directly into the gut wrench technique. Our athlete, again, is going to start with flat feet, his feet about 4 to 6 inches from his rear end. We're going to start with elevated hips. Now, we want to emphasize this push with the thighs and with the hips. And also, when the athlete makes his bridge, emphasize this, that he bends and gets as high as he can with his hips rather than putting a lot of strain on his back. You want a full arch, but if you want to increase the height in the arch, emphasize the fact that he should bend at the hips. Now we'll just do a fluid motion, touches his shoulders. You can see a nice push, nice power there in the legs. The other thing, notice how the athlete here uses his hands. He's not using the hands to push himself up on the bridge. He's only using his hands to steady his body from sliding forward. Again, a nice fluid motion, you get a good hip pop right here with the legs. Okay, the next thing we're going to take a look at is the lock. Before we talk about a lock, the first thing is it's important to secure the lock as quickly as possible. We'll look at 3 ways to secure the lock. The first way is this. We're going to come here, reach over the top of one shoulder, step up if you need to. We're going to pull up here. The far arm, you should just slide underneath and come right back to secure the lock. From another angle, it looks like this. The defensive man probably will keep his chest and armpits as tight as he can to the mat. In this case, it's hard to secure a lock here, hard to secure a lock here. We've got to open them up. Forearm on the mat, reach over the top of the shoulder, lift up, slide the forearm underneath, secure the lock. That's the first way. Now, another way, if his shoulders aren't there, if you leave a little bit of space, you can come right up to here, secure the lock starting high, and then to adjust that lock, take your knee, stick it right between his legs, pull the lock down. If you want a mid-range gut wrench, lock on the mid-range. If you want a low gut wrench, just continue to pull it all the way down to the very low spot. A third way is, turn this way. A third way, we're going to secure the hip. We're going to go into it like we go into a reverse lift type of a lock. Both hands, again, he's flat, he's real tight. I can't secure the lock here. I come to here, I can't get that arm up. I'm going to come here. Notice on the far leg, I'm sitting my shin right across the back of his leg. So I'm blocking his knee a little bit so it won't go anyplace. I'm grabbing the other hip with 2 hands, pull high to create some space. This hand comes underneath, and I've got my lock. So those are 3 quick, easy ways to secure the lock. Now, the importance of the lock, first of all, the tightness is very important. All the way through the technique, we want to be able to create some type of a torque. And when we get into this later, we want to be able to load the hips and turn the wrestler's body this way. From a defensive standpoint, he's going to try to keep his belly and his hips square to that mat and glued to that mat. A common mistake with locks when athletes start to do this gut wrench is they'll slip their lock. We want to stay chest to back, at all times. So the tightness of the lock is very important. The type of lock, some people prefer this, some people prefer this. Whatever type of lock you take, when you're ready to do the gut wrench, you need to cinch that and leave no space and make that as tight as possible. A real good drill for developing a tight lock is this. We'll bring out another athlete here and we'll do a drill. We're going to put one athlete on all fours, and let's have you face this way. The other athlete's going to come up, secure a lock, and we want to emphasize tight chest to back. And we're going to do this a little hang drill. He's going to start by hanging, then he's going to lift and pull his torso without touching his opponent or touching the mat all the way over to the other side, up and over and hang, up and over and hang, up and over and hang. Now this does a couple things. It develops a tight lock. Notice he's not sliding side to side. He's staying chest to chest. The other thing is it gives him a feel for creating a good solid torque on his opponent. Okay, that's good. As you can tell, this is a very, very hard drill to do for both athletes, but it will develop very good strength in that tight lock position. The next thing we're going to take a look at is the start position on the gut wrench. It's hard to teach a gut wrench without talking a little bit about defense, but from a defensive standpoint, the athlete is going to continue to move and try to keep the offensive wrestler out of position on top. In order to prevent this, to get a solid start in the gut wrench, it's important that once you secure your lock, and sometimes even before you secure your lock, that you take this position here. As you can see, I'm taking my shin, placing it on the back of his thigh or his hamstring, knees on the outside, foot's on the inside. My other leg is doing exactly the same thing, and I'm just sitting on top of him just like this to prevent him from moving. Now from here I can go ahead and secure my lock. I may have to step up and compromise my start position a little bit, but once you get your lock, you can come right back to the solid start position here. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is breaking your opponent's defense. Now there's two things you want to focus on. The first thing is you want to focus on beating the hip. The second thing is you want to focus on breaking his arm. Not literally, of course, but you want to break his defense. So the hip is the most important. The arm is second most important. So a little drill that you can do, you want to force reaction a little bit too. Little drill you can do, and it's like a freestyle hip tilt, is right to there. See how I beat the hip with my knee and with my leg? Some people say this is using legs, but actually in Greco we use legs quite a bit. There's legal ways, there's illegal ways to use legs. This is a very legal way because I'm not finishing my turn by blocking. But we want to get this idea, beating the hip here to here. I beat the hip, beat the hip. You can do this, a quick little drill, get your partner to react a little bit more. You can just do it without the hips, just getting used to this motion because driving that knee is very important. Start with this, go to this, controlling, lifting the hip. Because when we load the hips, we want to be able to pull the hip on top of our hip. And then you can come back to a lock position, do the same drill from a lock, there to there, there, there to there. So beating the hips is very important little drill. The next part of the gut wrench we're going to take a look at is loading the hips. Now when we do this, we've got our athlete, he's in a good start position, he's got a good tight lock. The first thing we need to do is a subtle little fake to one side. What we want to do is we want to get a little bit of an edge to beat this hip. We're going to force a little bit of reaction by the defensive man. He looks to the right, he thinks he's going right. Then we're going to explode back to the other side, beat the hip, and load the hips. This is the correct position for loading the hips. As you can see, we've got flat-footed position, very similar to the start bridge position that we worked on, the basic skill. A little bit of space between the feet and the butt. We've got one wrestler's hips loaded on top of this wrestler's hips. We've got a tight lock. The other thing you can't see from this angle is the gut wrencher's face should be looking up towards the ceiling. Now we're in a real good position to do our finish. Just like to point out one thing. Sometimes, and it's very common for athletes to leave this leg down here, or for this athlete to start to slide off the hip right to there. Very difficult to finish the gut wrench from this position. You have to have solid, secure control of this. So this athlete needs to force his knee up, do something to secure this hip. We call this loading the hips. Now in this position, as you can see, the gut wrencher is in a very strong, powerful position to be able to finish. He's going to do an explosive hip pop bridge and then just arch and roll right through. As you can see, with the loaded body here, he controls his opponent very easily. Okay, let's take a look at a gut wrench from another angle. Couple things. You get a good look here at the head position of the wrestler. One common mistake that wrestlers make when they start doing gut wrenches is they want to get to this position and they want to roll through across their shoulders to finish. This is a dangerous position. They can get stopped and caught on their back and pinned. Also, there's a whole lot less power in an athlete in this position just rolling through, trying to pull his opponent through with his arms, compared to the power that you have generated from your thighs and hips in a good, strong back arch hip pop position. So see the proper position, or the proper finish again, high back arch, rolls them all the way through. Okay, a drill that you can do with your athletes once they've learned the gut wrench, a good warm-up drill that you can do is, we call it shadow guts, and they just do gut wrenches without a partner. They go through each step of it. They get their lock, fake one way, drive the hip, load the hip, go into their high arch.
Here's several examples of a gut wrench. They're laid in at normal speed so that you get a sense of timing in the way the athlete is executing the move.
Next, we're going to talk about parterre defense, and we'll start out with the basic position. We want to take a position flat on the mat here. The first thing we want to talk about is the weight for parterre defense should be distributed centered on your hips, upper part of your thigh, and into the lower part of your abdomen, right here. Now, one of the ways you can transfer the weight there, if I'm just relaxed here, the weight is distributed across my whole body. But if I pinch my butt cheeks slightly, you can see that pinch, and you can see how I elevate ever so slightly. My feet come off the mat, my knees come off the mat. My butt and torso area is real tight. And then I want to arch my chest just a little bit. This basic position is really the foundation and the start position for the gut wrench. The next thing we want to take a look at, the legs should be spread at a comfortable base right here to start with anyways. The hips are square to the mat at all times. The other thing is hand position. We want about a 45-degree angle. Want the shoulders up and pinched together just slightly, again, maintaining tight shoulder position. The hands should be turned in a little bit. Can be dangerous. You can get caught with your post on the mat in this position if you turn in slightly, put the weight on the palms of your hands. The other important thing when we look at defending a gut wrench, you want to be able to slide and move here. And if you're at a 45-degree angle, your shoulders are up, you're sliding on the palms of your hands, you can slide again here. Tendency to get caught, possibility for injury, and also increases your risk of getting turned. So that's our basic parterre defense. Now we're going to bring one of our athletes out and look at an important concept in parterre defense called a power line. I think when people look at parterre defense, generally they look at it and they think that parterre defense is accomplished by posting an arm, posting a leg. And although that's an important part of it, and your reaction to get to that position is very important, even more important is the way the athlete uses the rest of his body. So let's just assume that there's an attack to the right, and the position is a post right, post right. Now, the back leg we're going to look at as being the anchor leg, and if we get another angle of this, We've got a gut wrench going right, so the athlete assumes a position here. He's going to keep his hips square to the mat. He posts his right leg, posts his right arm, slightly looks into the gut wrench. Now the back leg is what we want to focus in on. Notice the hip. Again, the athlete's very tight through here, tight through the hip and buttocks area, and is actually elevating this leg off slightly. Take a look at an example of poor position where the athlete turns his hips down and posts. Very dangerous, because at all times throughout the gut wrench, the athlete must adjust back and forth to his opponent's attack. Here, he's very vulnerable to an offside gut. But if you think about keep the hip square, we've got a gut wrench right position. We've got very good position. Now, I want you to draw an imaginary line here and have your athletes think about making a power line from the top of their right hand, or if there's, again, a gut wrench attack right, you've got a power line from his right post arm, drawn all the way down through here to the center of his body, all the way to his back anchor leg. This is where the power for defending a gut wrench comes, and this is where we want to adjust back to every time there's a gut wrench attack. Okay, here again we have our basic start position in parterre for defense, and now we're going to look at a basic gut wrench position right. You can see the posting of the right leg, turning of the head. The head needs to stay up, posting of the arm. We make a power line down through this back leg. Gut left, gut right, gut left. Now, when we go back and forth on this drill, and this is a drill that coaches can drill their athletes to train reaction. Reaction time, adjusting to their opponent's attack, is very important. And again, the adjustment of the hips is very important. Okay, we've looked at the basic gut wrench defense without a partner. Now we're going to take a look at it with a partner on top. Watch the bottom man's reactions, and keep in mind that this is a battle for the hips. So again, we'll emphasize the point that the hips of the parterre defense man need to stay square at all times to the mat, and he needs to be ready to react back and forth. Okay, we'd like to do one other drill now and show you a drill to emphasize the idea of the power line. The center part, pull off just for a second, the center part of the defense man's body should be solid, strong, and rigid. We talked about the power line here. Here's a drill that you can emphasize this concept to your wrestlers. Put a wrestler on top. We're going to tell the bottom man to actually break this power line and let the top man load him on his hips. Now we see the power line's broken. We see a bit of a jackknife here. Now we're going to ask the top man to stop right here and just act like dead weight. The defensive wrestler now is going to make a power line by straightening out this leg, and you can see how he pulls with leverage and with strong hips. He pulls his opponent right back on top again. Again, this is not a defense necessarily, but we just want to emphasize the power and the use of the hips in this way for the defensive man. Now we'll talk a little bit about movement in the parterre position. First basic principle of movement is we want short little motions, and we'll have a backward motion, we push with the hands, short motion, and every time the wrestler moves, and then to the side, we've got a side to side, we've got a forward motion. Notice every time the defensive man moves, he always adjusts back to a solid position. He'll pull his hands a little ways and adjust back to his proper position again. Poor movement would be this, bringing the elbows all the way back, especially resting the elbows back here, but bringing the elbows in close to the side, turning a hip up, bringing the feet together, or legs together too close. Again, any movement that takes the bottom man out of his basic position is really not a good movement. So we want to emphasize short little movement patterns. Okay, another aspect of movement that we want to talk about are the purposes of movement. First of all, you want to move to react to your opponent's attack. Obviously, you need to adjust. If there's a gut wrench right, he comes back to the left. You need to react back to that left gut wrench position. Okay, now we'll take a look at movement with the partner on top. The thing we want to keep in mind is the purpose in this movement is to prevent the top man, the attacking wrestler, from getting set, and we want to take him out of position. So the first thing is we want to work on breaking the lock. Notice the bottom man moves forward, and at all times he keeps his hips square, he keeps pressure on the lock. We'll take a look at that at another angle. Notice the hips are square, the pressure's on the lock. He breaks the top man's lock. very good strategy in the defensive position. If a man can't get set, he's going to have a difficult time scoring. Now we'll take a look at another way to move and to off-balance the offensive attacker. This time the offensive man is going to have a good solid lock, lower or midsection lock. And what we want to do with this is the bottom man wants to off-balance. So we're going to look at a little hip-hop side motion. See how he throws the top man off? Now, a couple things, and it's hard to see at this angle, but notice that the bottom man, even when he hips in, he's keeping his hips square, so he's moving laterally. Once he knocks his opponent off position, he keeps the pressure on laterally and a little bit forward, and you can see the top man's really struggling there with his position. So movement to prevent the score, to prevent the attack, is very important in the parterre defense position. Okay, let's take a look at two more drills, excellent drills for developing parterre defense. The first one is a movement drill. What we're going to do is we're going to put our partner on top, is just going to straddle the bottom man, make him carry all of his weight, and we're going to have the bottom man move. Short little motions, short little movements. Very hard to move underneath, but this is a good way to train good strength and movement underneath and to keep your athlete real alert while he's on bottom. The second drill is this. Again, we did this for the gut wrench drill for the offensive man in our earlier series, but we're going to do the same hang drill this time for the bottom man. Again, it takes a tremendous amount of torso and rib strength, especially when the offensive man has committed himself to a gut wrench. The position is very important, but also the strength of the torso and rib area is really a key part of having a strong gut wrench defense. This drill will help develop that. So the top man is going to hang and pull and torque. He's going to hang the other side. The bottom man should keep his head up. Try to make good solid position up and back, side to side. You can do this for time, and I'll guarantee you it's a workout. Parterre defense is probably the most important area of the sport right now, so it's very important that athletes understand good positioning and have the technique and strength to be able to prevent the top man from scoring in the parterre.
Apply what you just learned about gut wrench defense to these live examples. Hipping in and stepping over can be an effective counter to the gut wrench. You do have to be careful that it doesn't involve illegal use of the legs.
Okay, next we're going to take a look at a lift, and we're going to just show a classic swing step lift. First of all, the start position is the same as a gut wrench. You can see the shins are straddled the back of the hamstrings. The top man's going to take his lock. Now the difference with the lock, because we're lifting, we need a little bit more extension and a little bit more leverage. So the lifter is going to take a knuckle lock. He's going to extend his arms here. Now the swing step comes from this. The lifter is going to lift to the right. So the swing step, this leg is going to drop back. By doing this, it creates the impression that he's going left with the gut wrench, forces a reaction, and you want as much as possible to get the defensive man to turn his hip down. Now, from this point, what we can do is we can look at the actual lift as two parts. The first part is the snatch, and the second part is the lift. Now, to break the snatch part of this down a little bit more, very important when you snatch that you explode. Hard to lift slow motion, we want a very explosive motion. So we're going to snatch, then we're going to look at readjusting the lock to make the hips tight. Once you snatch, it's important that you bring the bottom man's hips in tight with your hips, readjust the lock. The next thing then we're going to look at is a settling of the lifter's hips down low in a good solid lift position. We should be able to look at the lifter's back. His back should be straight with his opponent's hips in his hips. And then the last part is the lift. So we'll take a look at these motions up to the snatch position. So we've got swing step, step, snatch. Again, from the snatch, you can see this quick readjustment. The hips here, if you're not locked tight enough, you can always throw your opponent up again and readjust, sink that arm deep. Now we've got a secure lock. Hips are real tight. You can see the lifter's in a good solid position. Now he's going to come straight up, keep his head up, and he's going to lift. And then from that position, he can go into his belly to back or any other type of a finish that he'd like. Let's take a look at that again. One more time. This time we'll take a close look at that readjustment. What you want to do on the snatch also is throw that body up as high as you can, catch it, resync that arm. Okay, and go back down again, and let's see what happens when we don't secure that lock. Okay, see the space here, and it's a little bit harder to control the hips. Again, when we go to finish our lift, it's important that, like on the gut wrench, that we have a tight chest to chest or belly to back position so that the bottom man can't belly out and step over in defense. So now from here again, let's just adjust this. He's going to throw his partner up, readjust, cinch his lock. Now we've got a good, strong, solid position. An excellent drill that you can use with your athletes to develop the explosiveness of the snatch is just this. The bottom man is just going to stay real rigid with his body. The top man's going to come up and straddle one leg. He's going to reach down, grab the hips, and just throw his partner up and regrip, and then drop him, throw up, regrip, throw up, regrip. You can do it quicker, quick. You can do it for time. You can do it for repetitions. An excellent way to get your athlete used to snatching his opponent. Okay, we're going to take a look at a couple basic finishes from the swing step lift. And the first one is a straight over belly to back for 5 points. Got a swing step, opponent's up in the air, straight back and over for 5 points. Take a look at that at another angle. Nice, you guys. Okay, now same swing step lift. This time he's going to take it to the side for 3 points. Again, when we go to the side for 3, we want to concentrate on keeping the hips tight and rotating the man's hips through the air as quick as possible. We'll see that from another angle as well.
Two-time Olympic gold medalist John Ronigan of Norway does a great job of showing us how effective a combination gut wrench to a lift can be. Let's look at several more examples of finishes for the lift.
Okay, now we're going to take a look at the same swing step lift with a kick over finish. This kick over finish is real effective, especially when the wrestler can't step off and clear the leg. From another angle, we can see how important that kick on the inside leg is to finish. Thigh on thigh, elevates the high leg right into a high arch throw for 3 points. Now the last technique we're going to look at is a start of a lift, to fake a lift, and actually switch off to a gut wrench on the far side. Again, this has to do with feeding the hip. Starts to lift, comes back to the other side and guts. And we'll take a look at that also from another angle.
The lift to a gut wrench is an extremely effective technique in Greco-Roman wrestling. Let's watch several examples.
Position, strength, and power are all very important in the ability to execute lifts. It's important that your athletes feel comfortable lifting bodies. So as part of your training sessions, you can have them do lifting drills with another body, almost like they would lift weights. They can do from different positions and different angles. From a coaching standpoint, you want to make sure their position's correct. You want to make sure that they're lifting to the point of being fatigued, but take them step by step build them up to the place where they feel real comfortable and strong lifting bodies. Let's take a look at a few exercises that you can use with your athletes. We're going to take a look at lift defense, and before we do, I just want to talk about a couple concepts that are important to keep in mind. Throughout the entire defense, it's important for the defensive man to keep his body in a tight arch position, chest down, legs slightly up, almost in a snowplow type position. We're going to look at two movement patterns here that are very important. One in preventing the snatch, and the second one will be during the snatch. Now, keep in mind that when we're working with parterre defense, the objective is always going to be for the bottom man to keep moving himself out of position. When we looked at the lift, it was very important. The first thing, the snatch, the quick explosive snatch brought the defensive man to a good solid hip position where he could be lifted more easily. So the defensive man wants to prevent that good position and constantly move out of position. So the first is we're going to do this with this inside leg. Let's just picture a snatch on this side. The lifter is straddled here. The inside leg, we're just going to keep elevated slightly with short movements forward. Short movements forward. Again, you can see we're not bending at the knee, bending at the hip joint. Hips are still square. We'll come back again and take a look at a poor position. Again, if he turns the hip up as he lifts, turns the hip up, lifts the leg, and turns the hip up, that's not a real good position. The other thing is bending the knee and moving forward. Possibility you can get called for legs. So it's important to keep this leg straight, elevate right here at the hip joint, and push short movements, come back to position, short movements back to position. Okay, that's a movement pattern for preventing the snatch. Now the second one is, if it's too late to prevent the snatch, the lifter is stepped to the side, he started to do the snatch, we're going to do what's called a bump and run. This is a little bit more dramatic type of a defense, but we need to do that to knock the lifter out of position. On this, again, this is the inside leg that's being straddled. The outside leg, we're going to pull this knee up to here, dig the toe in. The defensive man is going to push forward, elevate the inside leg, and bump. Again, notice the snowplow position here. We'll come back and look at that again. The outside leg is the push leg. Hips are still square. He's going to push, bump and run, and then recovers again back to a solid parterre position. One more time, if we can look on this side, this will be the push leg this time. Again, here we see a good position. The hips are square. A poor position would be the hips come up, and then there's a bump and run. Again, we never want to violate these principles. Hips should always be square. Push there, push and pull, elevate, and a good slide. You can do these drills with your athletes on their own with their parterre movement. You can do parterre defense or gut wrench movement, and then to a lift movement, just getting them used to these movement patterns and the good solid defensive positions. Okay, here's what it looks like with the partner on top and preventing the lift. The bottom man, he knows his partner is going to lift or his opponent's going to lift. He elevates with the inside leg and starts moving forward and a little bit away from the lift, and see how that keeps the top man out of position, prevents him from getting set and starting the lift. If you can beat the lift at this point, it's the safest place to be able to beat the lift. Now we'll take a look at that one more time. Notice the inside leg stays high and straight, short little movements forward and away from the lifter. Okay, now we'll take a look at the bump and run. The bump and run defense you have to use when the top man is a little bit more advanced in his lift. He steps up to snatch, push, bump, and run, take them out of position. Top man again, steps up for the snatch. Again, bring it up, bring it up. That's it. Bring it up, bump and run. Nice. The bump and run drill is very important, so here's a drill you can use to develop the bump and run. Top man is just going to straddle and do a little snatch. As his hips come off, the bottom man is just going to continue to bump and run. Maintaining good position all the way through. The last section on lift defense, I just want to take a look at proper body position and just take a look at some of the mechanics in defending the lift. We've got a good solid lift position here. If we've got a good solid lift position, we've got a straight leg elevated in the center, head up, looking forward, actually forward and away, arms out, and a good snowplow position. This back leg should be turned down just a little bit. Now let's take a look at a poor position would be if he jackknifes, and if we can turn sideways here, see how his body's in a jackknife position. This leg is down, this leg is down. It makes it real easy for the top man to control and to hold. And if this leg is high, some athletes like to do that again, makes it easy to control and turn that hip. So we're going to just adjust back to a solid snowplow position. This angle, we've got the inside leg lifted, this leg down, moving forward and away from the lift. And see how much more difficult it is for the top man to hold and maintain a good lift position. So again, the whole idea is to make it as hard for the top man as possible to take him out of a good solid lifting position.
As you watch these examples of defending the lift, pay close attention to how smoothly you have to be able to transition between gut wrench defense and lift defense as the two moves work so closely together.
Now we're going to take a look at a basic reverse lift. And first of all, we're going to look at two ways to secure the lock. The first is the traditional way, where it's go to the far hip. Again, we saw that on the regular gut wrench, but this time instead of taking a gut wrench lock, we're going to secure a reverse lift lock. And the other way would be an inside lock, where we go to the near shoulder, elevate, sneak the inside arm underneath again, and to secure a good reverse lock position. Okay, now, to start the reverse lock, there's a couple things we want to key in on. Once we've secured the lock, it's important to control the inside space of the body. And as you can see, the lifter now is jamming his knee up under the armpit. He's getting his body as close to his opponent's bodies as possible. Again, this is a battle for the hips. Now, eventually the lifter is going to have to snatch his opponent's hips up onto his hips and stand up. His opponent is moving back and away. So the first thing we want to do is create a reaction on the defensive man to push back in. So the offensive man pushes in this way, creates a reaction, and then goes right into a snatch, steps up, and does his lift. Take a look at that one more time. The battle and control for the inside of the body here is really very important on this reverse lift. So we'll take a look at that one more time. Secure the lift, pressure in, create the reaction, snatch back, and stand right up to the lift. Okay, now let's take a look at the whole thing. A reverse lift, the setup, the lift, and then we'll finish with a nice back arch finish for 3 points, +1. Nice.
Here are several examples of this reverse lift technique. Here's two-time Olympic champion and four-time world champion Alexander Karelin of Russia with his version of the reverse lift.
Now we're going to take a look at reverse lift defense. Before we do, we're going to look at the basic position first. Again, our basic parterre position is here. Everything starts from here. On a lift defense now, the basic position, or reverse lift defense, the basic position is right to here. Want to pull our elbow to our knee and keep that elbow to knee position real good. Now, it's real important that we prevent the lifter from getting to our body. By bringing the elbow to the knee, we keep him away. The movement is backing away. Again, everything in defending lifts is taking our hips out of position away from the lifter's hips. So if he's lifting on the right side, my position's here, and then I move back and away. Now notice the back leg. If I'm defending to the right here, and I turn my hip down too far, I become a little bit vulnerable to the opposite side. Two things that the offensive man will do if I turn my hip down. He may tilt me back and catch me this way, but the other thing is the offensive man may be jumping back and forth. And if I give up too much here, he may jump over to the other side, and I'm not able to react as quickly when my hip's down. If I keep my hips square again, we come back to that hip square position that we've talked about all the way through parterre defense. Hip square, again, notice my back anchor leg, butt cheeks pinched together, elevating at the hips, makes it real easy for me then to come back to this position, push back and away, back here, back and away, back here, back and away, short movement, back and away. That's our basic reverse lift position and movement drill. You can do that with your athletes on their own. And now let's take a look at what that looks like with a partner on top trying to do a reverse lift. Okay, because a reverse lift is real hard to disguise, it's easy to know when your offensive man is going to do a reverse lift. So once you feel him start to lock up the reverse lift position, right away you want to go elbow to knee, and he locks up the reverse position, he gets in there. You've beat him already now. Now the offensive man is going to have to work to open you up to this position. So one of the things the offensive man will do is he'll jump side to side, and as he does that, the bottom man needs to continue to adjust back and forth. The other thing the defensive man needs to be able to do is when he's in this position, he should be moving his hips back and away, pushing back and away. Again, taking his hips as far away from the offensive man's hips as possible. Break. And come on back again. We'll take a look at that one more time. He secures his lock. He's going to lift. He's going to go side to side. The defensive man, again, suddenly moves back and away each time, back and away. Offensive man jumps, back and away. Offensive man jumps, back and away. Okay, now let's take a look at another position. When the offensive man secures his lock and he's beating the defensive man to the inside. Okay, now this is a little bit more advanced point in the lift. From this point, the defensive man is going to need to somehow come back to that elbow to knee position and to get his hips away. So from here, the defensive man is just going to pull back, post his forearm on the offensive man's knee, and then adjust right away to an elbow to knee position. Let's take a look at that again. We'll stop at this post position, pulls back, clears some space, pushes away. You don't want to stay there too long, but just enough to post, push, create a little space, and then right to that elbow to knee position, and then again start to move back and away. As you can see, motion is very important in all aspects of parterre defense, whether it's gut wrench, whether it's lift, whether it's reverse lift. The other thing that's very important in parterre defense is that the bottom man continues to react and has a very good feel and understanding is what the offensive man is trying to do.
Once again, apply the technique as you just learned it to the actual footage as you view these reverse left defense techniques.
Okay, here's a parterre movement defensive drill. What we're going to do is we're going to have the athlete just go through all his movements in the basic parterre position. There we see a lift. We see a gut wrench post, reverse lift position, changes off. Very good way to develop mobility, reactions in that bottom parterre position. Nice job, Jim.